Hello and welcome back to part two of my interview with Amy McPhie Allebest. In part one, we had a really fun discussion, interesting, fascinating, touching, moving about her growing up in the church and feeling empowered and equal, but then as she went to the temple, served a mission, got married in the temple, how sort of her concerns about patriarchy and about feminism and about equality all started emerging and really starting to weigh her down and to cause her to struggle. And it was a great discussion. I kind of mentioned to you, Amy, that this isn't a discussion I've really had on Mormon Stories. We're 668 episodes in, and I've never just interviewed sort of just like a female member of the church to talk about their journey with patriarchy. We've done Margaret Toscano, we've done Claudia Bushman, we've done Nyla McBain or Fiona Givens, but never just sort of a woman's experience developmentally in the church. So for me, this is sort of, wow, it's something that I should have done a long time ago, but I'm loving it. Now we're going to jump into, so how many years ago did you speak with Claudia? How long ago was that?
So it was when after we got back from Spain, we moved to Southern California, and it was just an email.
How long ago was that?
Thread, and that was 4 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this episode is going to be focusing on kind of your more recent sort of grappling with patriarchy and feminism in the church, sort of in the intellectual realm as it relates to church policy, doctrine,
Yep.
the role inside or outside, activism, that sort of thing. Right?
Yep.
Okay, so anything you want to talk about before we talk about Claudia?
No.
Or should we start there?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great place to start.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah. Well, my conversation with Claudia Bushman also was kind of corresponded with this letter that I wrote to Elder Holland.
You want to talk about that first then, or was
Sure.
it at the same time? Or?
They're the
Okay.
same experience,
Okay.
basically. I had, because as I talked about before, I'd struggled mostly with the temple, and because I had felt so much a part of Zion and making things better, in kind of that, I still had kind of an innocence about that, and I thought, well, the brethren probably just don't know, because like we talked about before, sometimes men just don't notice because they're paying attention to what the men's part is, and they might not even notice how it sounds to women. So I thought, if someone just tells them, then I'll be okay, and they'll say, thank you for letting me know. So I wrote this letter to Elder Holland because I felt a special bond to Elder Holland, because he had gone to Chile, and because he's a word person too. He's so literate, and I just admire his intellect, and he's such a tender man. And so I wrote him this letter about the temple and how I had felt, and just like poured my heart out and worked on it for a long time. Sent it to him and got a letter back from just the church secretary, just kind of a form letter probably. And that was pretty disheartening for me. Because, I mean, I guess I knew that they can't answer every letter. I knew that. But I just thought, well, how are they going to hear the voices of women then? And how is my voice ever going to be heard? Because I'd already tried. I mean, I can talk about it with my sisters and my friends, and I can even talk about it with the temple president, but nothing was getting better. And in fact, I was feeling worse and worse all the time. And so then I thought, like, well, you're not going to hear us. How can you ever hear us if we can't talk to you? Anyway, I was feeling really discouraged, and I was praying one night. I remember this, pouring my heart out to God and saying, I said the phrase, should I even bother speaking out? Should I even bother trying to make my voice heard? And I felt like empty. Finished my prayer, but I felt kind of like Eric and I call it, my husband and I call it the river, where you feel something almost like kind of pushing you in a direction, and I don't know, it's kind of this mystery. And I felt like I was just picking up my feet and letting a current carry me. And I thought, I want to look at, what I want to look at is Eugene England. I want to read something by him. And that quickly linked me. I read something by him. It was great. It quickly linked me to a speech that Claudia Bushman had given. And the title was, "Should Mormon Women Speak Out?" And that was literally the phrase that I had just said in my prayer. And I felt like it was serendipity again. It felt like, whoa, it was like moments before that I had prayed that to God, and then somehow up on my screen was, Claudia Bushman, should Mormon women speak out? And the answer, the long and short of it, was yes. Yes, we need to. And that led me to, it kind of just triggered this, train of memories that I thought, oh yeah, Claudia Bushman, I had heard her on Mormon Stories, and I remembered that she had started Exponent 2. And I had always meant to look into Exponent 2 and never had. And I brought up the Exponent 2 homepage, and the call for articles was, tell us what you feel about the temple. So in a matter of moments, I had Claudia Bushman speaking to me, answering the question I had just asked. I had this discouraging response about the temple and thinking, no one's ever going to hear what I have to say about the temple. And there's this call for articles about the temple. So I sent my letter to Elder Holland. I made it just an open letter. I took his name out and made it an open letter, a letter to an apostle, and I submitted it to Exponent, and that's the first time I'd ever been published, and it got published in Exponent, and that was so gratifying for me to just see, to have it be heard, to have somebody read it, just on a human level, right? Just the comfort that it gives you to have a conversation and have somebody say, I hear you. That hadn't happened yet, except with my sister, but to do it on a broader level, like, what are we gonna do? This is hard for us. It was really satisfying. So that was great. That led also for me to feel like Claudia Bushman was someone I had always admired and respected, and we have some mutual friends. And so I emailed a mutual friend and said, I'm having a really hard time, because I was at that point. Also being uprooted from my ward in the Bay Area where we had been for a long time. We had gone to Spain, had moved to Southern California, and I was really alone. And it was quite a different political environment, atmosphere down there than the Bay Area is. And I felt like an alien. And in my ward too, the wards they felt very much more conservative. And I was, a redwood tree in a desert down there and just drying up and like, So I reached out to Claudia thinking that would be like a source of water for me, and it was. And that was that whole experience with the letter and Exponent and Claudia was huge for me, because I felt, and also I was listening to a lot of Mormon Stories podcasts at that time too, and hearing Fiona Givens and Richard and Claudia Bushman and a lot of other people, that I felt a sense of community and hope. And then in my email, I said, okay, here's what I did. I wrote to Elder Holland, and I can see her just like probably on the other end, like this naive girl thought that she could write to Elder Holland and make a difference. But she was so nice to me. And one thing she said was, the thing that she said that really like set me on this course was, she said, don't bother trying to change the church. You're wasting your time trying to change the church. There's no escaping Genesis. And she said, do your work laterally with other women, but you're wasting your time trying to change the church from top down. And I was, she said lots of other stuff that was nourishing and helpful and validating and brilliant and insightful, but that one I was like, what? First of all, there's no escaping Genesis. Don't tell me I can't do something, because then I will be determined to do it. And I thought, of course there's escaping Genesis. I just wrote an article about this on Medium the other day. But that stuck in my mind like a rock in my shoe, just kind of like, what does she mean? Like, there's no escaping this? Like, we can't make a difference? And it kind of set up these two options of how, if we do want to make our voices heard in the church, there's the approach of doing it from the top down, which is what I very naively tried to do with that letter. Or there's what Claudia Bushman really has done, I believe, kind of her whole career, her whole life as a Mormon feminist is strengthening other women, listening to their stories, publishing their stories, starting the exponent, and perhaps, I hope I'm understanding her correctly, but that will rise organically is the hope, I think, and change things from the grassroots up. So I fought against that for a while and doctrinally fought against it. And it led me to one of my next steps was we moved back to the Bay Area. And I started taking classes, night classes at Stanford. My kids were in school. And is this okay if I go this direction now? It kind of dovetails with some other things. But chronologically, what happened was I enrolled in these classes. I thought, I want to go back to grad school. I hadn't been working, so I needed to kind of like get my feet wet gradually. And so I started taking night classes that anybody can take at Stanford. And my first class was on Catholicism and Protestantism, so it was a European history course. And I was taking it for a grade because I wanted to eventually go back to grad school. So I did this big research paper called Escaping Genesis, and I went back to European history, and I thought, how have Catholics dealt with this all the way through? I actually started with Old Testament, with ancient Hebrew culture, and looked at the misogyny of that culture, and then Christ's message, which was actually really empowering for women. And then what I looked at was that Catholic women had, like I talked about in Spain, one major thing they had going for them was this private, intimate relationship, spiritual relationship with women. And they also had an option out of marriage in that they could go into, a cloister, they could become a nun, and that was the way a lot of women obtained an education in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Even like Galileo's daughter, Galileo is one of the famous examples of, he was an educated man, he valued learning, so he did not want his daughter getting married and then just being a baby factory. He put her in a nunnery, basically, so that she could get an education. So Catholics had these two great things going for them: education, option for education, and the spiritual relationship. But the problem was that they also had a very similar patriarchal, priestly hierarchy from the Pope down to the bishops and the cardinals and all the way down, very organized, and that made it hard to change things for women. Privately, they could individually get an education. They could individually have a relationship with God the Father and Mother God, but they weren't able to advance women's liberation very much for the broader culture, is what my assessment was in this paper. And that's, kind of a broad, sweeping statement, but I did notice that trend. And then as I thought about it, I thought, well, with Protestants, if you look at, I just chose one metric, and that was looking at women's suffrage, which countries allowed women to vote first. They were all Protestant countries before they were Catholic countries. The first one was Sweden, then it was British territories, and it spread throughout the Protestant countries in Europe. And then America in 1920, it wasn't until the 1930s that Catholic countries like Spain and France and Portugal allowed women to have the right to vote. And I thought, there's something here. What did the Protestants have that enabled broader cultural change for women? And what I found was Claudia Bushman's advice. I saw that kind of enacted through the Protestant church accidentally, I think, because if you remember, like Martin Luther was the one who started the Reformation in like 1517, I think, is when he nailed his theses to the door of the church. And one of his main points was, two main points actually, was that man should have a relationship with God directly, not mediated by priests, right? That was a big problem he had with the Catholic Church. And the other one was that the Mass was, again, it was mediated by priests in Latin, and that common people couldn't even read the Bible. No one was educated. And so then, of course, the invention of the printing press, and Martin Luther, even though he was totally sexist and said some terrible, his paradigm about women was just as bad as everybody else's, but he thought women should be educated. And in that way, then women started learning to read. And once they could read, they started thinking critically. And they started noticing the world around them and having a framework of language for what they were experiencing. And very slowly, then you start seeing like a Mary Wollstonecraft, for example, in England in the 1700s. And her argument still for the education of women was, yes, women are inferior in intellect to men, but it's only because we're not allowed to be educated. And if we're educated, then we will be equals. But her argument was also, and then, educated mothers will have more educated sons. And so that was, it still wasn't to the point of that women should be educated for their own sake because they're human beings, but they'll educate their children better. But that was a good step, right? A step in the right direction. And eventually, Protestant women turned out, Protestantism turned out people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And I think that just, that there's that historical case to be made for the grassroots approach, that it is a long process. It can be a really long process, from misogyny to chivalry, where women are like put on a pedestal and like kind of coddled, and they're weak and fragile, so be careful with them. That's a step up from like abusing women. The next step, the secular world has already moved on to the next step, which is egalitarianism, I think. But that's come through largely Protestant means, at least in Western civilization, and that's come through the education of everybody. So that was a big epiphany that I had, where I thought, I think there's a place for both. I'm having more thoughts. Maybe you have a certain direction you want to go with
this
this.
Is perfect.
Okay. It made me think of another conversation I had years ago with Camille Frank Olson. She's a professor at BYU. I was in her office having can we please talk to me? I was, I guess, kind of a basket case for a lot of years, searching and trying to talk to people like, who can help me? And so I visited her, and the thing that I remember that she said, I said, what can we do? And she said, listen, I'm the only woman in my meetings all the time. I'm the only woman there. And she said, the men in this church are good men. They don't see women's points of view because they're men. The same way that I don't think with a man's brain because I'm not a man, and I don't think with a tall person's brain because I'm a short person. It's not for lack of caring or trying, usually. Maybe sometimes it is. Usually it's not. And she said the same thing, I guess, that Claudia Bushman said, which was, tell them how you feel. Make your voice heard. Speak up in the meeting, because maybe they won't listen to you that time, but maybe somebody else is listening. But speak up. Don't just sit there timidly. Don't wait for permission, and don't wait for it to be comfortable, but make your voice heard. And so that just kind of ties in with, and with what other women are doing too. Nylan McBain with the Mormon Women's Project. I think these are all similar projects and ways to help women feel empowered, everyday women who are just going about their lives. It's that furtherance of, Martin Luther's emphasis on education, and that will raise us all up eventually.
So what happens next?
What next? What happens next in the church?
No, in your story.
Or for me? Oh.
So for example, you talked about a conversation with your husband in the car.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yes. Right. Yeah, that was around so I wrote that paper, had the big epiphany, and I just have to say too that learning about history has been key for me to see things in that broader historical context. But we can come back to that. But around the same time, I had a conversation with my husband in the car, And I was just saying how few women are in the scriptures, and just saying, just imagine if it were, if the percentage were reversed. I think it's something like 1% in the Bible of verses have to do with women at all. I said, just think of it if it were that way with men, if it were 99% by women, about women, for women, interpreted by women, and then even like the gospel doctrine and seminary manuals were written by women, like so many layers deep, were all about women. He's like, oh, wow. And then we said, yeah, and what if the prophet was a woman? And what if the apostles were women? And then it just started going out from there. And we kind of got on this like ranty brainstorm together about what that would look like. And I think that was the first seed in my mind of the article that I would eventually write. And I started writing it, actually. I thought, I wonder if this would be, I thought, I want to write this. And I didn't know if it would be best written like as a novel, kind of like The Giver, I was saying, like maybe a young adult novel where you kind of go along with the characters and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, it's patriarchy but reversed at like this big moment at the end. I didn't know. But it just lived in my Word docs as like this thing I was working on for a few years. But I would go to work on it and I would get bogged down, and then I'd have other papers I needed to write, and so I didn't write it for a while. I'd just write down ideas. And I searched, I was thinking, has someone done this already? This was maybe 3 years ago. And I thought, I wonder if someone's done this already. And I just was Googling everything I could think of to try to find an article. And I found Eloise Bell, I think, The Meeting, right? Which is shorter and more kind of funny, more a comment on culture, I think. And I thought, yeah, I thought it was awesome. But I wanted to do something more expansive and maybe more serious in tone. And I found that. There's also A Walk in the Pink Moccasins by Carolyn Pearson. But I didn't find that until after I had already written my article, and my sister and a friend both emailed me and said, have you read this? And I hadn't, but I had already written my article. But that was the seed. That was kind of, I want to write this, but I didn't write it for a while. So.
How did Sue Monk Kidd come into play?
Okay, that's a big one. I think, so I have a mission companion who had been going through something very similar as far as a feminist awakening and a faith crisis, and we didn't know that for years, and then we connected and discovered that we had been experiencing things, and she had been a dear friend of mine on my mission, and so we've been in touch. And I think she's the one who recommended this book to me. It's called Dance of the Dissident Daughter. And Sue Monk Kidd wrote The Secret Life of Bees, which I had heard about forever and never read. And I read The Dance of the Dissident Daughter first. And that, I'm still grappling with it. She used to be a writer, a Christian writer. She would write like inspirational stories. She's an amazing intellectual writer. It wasn't like cheap, like feel-good Christian writing. She's a smart woman. But she would write Christian. She was a Southern Baptist, and she had an experience that was similar to mine. She likened it to an awakening where she was asleep, and kind of started feeling that movement of like, oh, this isn't right. And she completely left. At least that was my understanding from her memoir, is that she left the Christian faith once she realized the extent of patriarchy. And it just goes through her whole awakening. And I guess reading that book along with taking these classes that I was taking gave me a much bigger, like I panned out from earth kind of like, and saw the chronology way bigger than I had seen it before, from, hunter-gatherers through, like, I guess hunter-gatherers were largely egalitarian societies, which I hadn't known, and that there were matriarchal societies way, way, way before, ancient Greece. And that then once things started to change, that patriarchy started to take hold. And another book that kind of dovetails with this that was really influential was John Stuart Mill, The Subjection of Women, which was written in the 1800s. But he said these stories, these, even the creation myths and these frameworks that we have in our societies weren't delivered to us out of whole cloth from God. People observed the world around them and then created stories that fit what they saw. And we all do this, right? We all create stories to fit our experience and what we see. And because women, and I need to learn more about this. I mean, we could have an anthropologist on here who would know much more about this. I'm still researching it because I think it's fascinating. But what makes sense to me is that women are smaller and women are tethered to their infants by pregnancy and then nursing and these beautiful things that we do for humanity, taking care of children, but that puts us in a really vulnerable position. And through years, thousands of years, right, of ancient history, that patriarchy developed, and then people started making up stories to that fit in with that, with what was already happening. And once I started kind of, John Stuart Mill said that, and then I studied Aristotle and thought like, oh, that totally fits with you see the universal first, and then you start looking at the particulars, which totally gives you confirmation bias for what you expect to see is what you'll start to see and think, well then, what Aristotle said about just as man is, the Lord and has dominion over the animals, man has dominion over women, and that's because that's what they saw. And that blew everything apart. It blew everything apart for me. And Sue Monk Kidd, to bring her back into the picture, was this one woman whose journey I could really relate to in a patriarchal Christian religion that she loved, that meant everything to her. And then once she kind of realized, and then through her pages I'm reading about her experience, going, oh crap, like I had only gone back as far as like, Joseph Smith, and then I went back even to the 1500s to Martin Luther, and I went back to the Old Testament, but I hadn't gone as far back as to see like, oh, I think patriarchy is made up. I think people made it up. Men are bigger and they have a lot more testosterone, and you see it in the animal kingdom that people pick on the next thing that are smaller than them. And that, you see it across all cultures in ancient, all cultures in all times, almost, with very few exceptions. And that was both liberating for me because I had been trying to jam this, square peg into the round hole, that God and the church is true, and so patriarchy is God's order. It's the way God wants it to be. And once I thought like, no, I think that people made it up, that was both liberating and then, well, now what do I do? And that's still the question, I think, yeah. But Sue Monk Kidd is like great to read if you're ready for it. In fact, when my mission companion recommended it, she said, like, clear out a few days, because I didn't come out of my room. I just cried for a long time, is what I remember her saying.
It doesn't sound very fun.
No, it's not. It's not fun. But then finally, then you can go, oh, that's why. That's why it didn't feel right, because it's not. Because it's not right.
Isn't it powerful to feel like you finally see the world clearly and you understand why things are the way they are?
Yeah. In fact, a quote from her book, from Sue Monk Kidd, is she said, "The truth will set you free, but it will destroy the safe, sweet way you live." Right? Do you know that quote? But first, it will destroy the safe, sweet way you live. And so you feel liberated, but you have to cry it out for a while. Right?
So. Talk about the women's statue in Boston real quick.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so so our family went to Boston for the summer. Just kind of like why we went to Spain. We just like to go places, and I make my kids read lots of books there and do history classes, and we just soak up everything we can from that place. And Boston was calling to me, and right by where we lived right on Beacon Street, kind of by the public garden. And there's that long walk of all of the statues. I had just read George Washington's biography too by Ron Chernow, which is amazing. And as a side note to that too, like reading about George Washington, this man that I still admire so much, but his blind spot regarding slavery just made me feel tender for humans and how we fumble and make huge, horrible, devastating mistakes, but are still trying our best. Anyway, his statue, and then there's like Hamilton and lots of, big figures in American history. And a ways down the street is the statue of the women. And up till this point, I had published that article in Exponent years before. And by that point, when we were in Boston, I'd been accepted into a grad program. And so I'd been writing papers a lot, but I hadn't really written anything. I hadn't published anything about Mormon feminism. I talked to people a lot about it, and I would write things but not publish them. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted, but it won't leave me alone, right? Like it just keeps coming back to me, and I just compulsively write about it, but then I just never submit it anywhere, really. I submitted an article to Exponent that summer we were in Boston, but I was thinking, do I want to be more public in my feelings about what my experience has been, and I found myself going to that there's like a triangle of 3 statues. There's Lucy Stone, and Abigail Adams, and Phyllis Wheatley. And I just found myself there a lot, and there's the statues of the women, and then like a plaque of the things that they had written. And I just felt what I think is the Spirit of God to me, to my spirit resonating. And I thought, I'm here on earth for such a short time, and the people that I admire the most are people who speak their truth. They're people who lead with love. They're people who search for truth and fact. And they're also people who are humble enough to know that they don't have all the answers. But I looked at these 3 women and saw what a difference they made for their culture, and that I'm the beneficiary, and my daughters are the beneficiary of these women's work. And I just felt so much admiration for them, because it's always so hard to be the first one. And those women were the first ones in many ways. And I felt like in my little way, even if it was just tiny and maybe only the people in the room would hear what I had to say, that's fine, but that I was going to say what I needed to say. And that if there was a paper that needed to get written, I would write it, and maybe I would publish it. And that I knew that when I'm on my deathbed someday, that if I didn't, I would look back with regret. And I just looked at those faces of those statues of women, and I wanted to be counted among them. And that was just this past summer. That was in July. And so I had sent my article off to Exponent, and that was about temple preparation for young women, which it's now in this month's or this quarter's Exponent. And that was great. I felt good about that. But then that kind of led into now where we are up to the current moment. So should I keep talking about that, or was there something?
Let's jump back, if it's okay, for
Sure.
just a second.
Yep.
So one thing we skipped is sort of the whole Kate Kelly ordained women thing.
Sure.
So let's rewind just for a bit.
Okay.
Talk about how you experienced that, whether it mattered, whether it impacted you, connected you, whether you were turned off by it, and talk about sort of the response to that, both by the church and by like the Natalie McBains of the world, and how they responded with sort of this middle ground of like, let's push for what we can push for. Talk about how all that affected you and how you experienced it.
Okay. So I would say how I experienced it was with so many mixed emotions. Just everything you said, I would just say yes, 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 all of those conflicting emotions and impressions. I would say that ordained women, I mean, that's just kind of what we talked about earlier, right? Was like the top-down approach to say, like, ordain women is like the imperative form of the verb, right? Like, please ordain women. And I remember Valerie Hudson Castler's response to that, right? Like, that's the most unfeminist thing I've ever heard of, to ask a patriarchal institution for permission to ordain you. And her whole thing was, we already have power, we already have priesthood, right? And to ask a patriarchy for permission is just unfeminist. And I think she even said, like, she laughed out loud. And I in her article, you remember this ruby slippers, I think, on her feet or something, about how we already have power. And I agreed with parts of lots of different people that I heard. To Valerie Hudson Castler, I felt like, I agree we already have power, and part of what I would love to see for women is that more Catholic individual relationship with giving ourselves permission, right? Like, to have a relationship with a mother in heaven if we want to, doing that on our own. But again, like the Catholics, if you rely on, and I say like the Catholics, I'm being so broad, but what I studied from 1,500 Catholic women that I read, they're, what the little that was written about them. The problem with that is, you can believe that you have the priesthood, and you can believe that you are empowered, and you can pray to Heavenly Mother on your own if you want. But, for example, you can baptize your child as a woman if you want, but their name's not going on the records of the church if you do that. And so I like Valerie Hudson Castler's optimism about, like, we already do have power, but if you're in patriarchy, it doesn't count for much. Like, that's a junky priesthood. If I already have what I'm gonna have, it's not the same. It's not the same. It doesn't function the same. And so Kate Kelly's approach, ordained women's approach, I thought it was great because it got a conversation going. I thought there's a place for that, and I don't know her. It might be the Holy Spirit of God prompting her to play her part, just like, I described feeling, at my Boston statue, going, this is what you were born to do. Do it. And, some people have a role to play, and they don't see the fruits of it for a long time, and everybody hates them for a while, and then you look back and they're vindicated by history. I don't know. I tend to be turned off by aggressive rhetoric, but I also have compassion, and I feel like, if I know the feeling of saying, like, I have something to say, and not being heard and going, I have something to say, and if you're not heard, you start shouting sometimes and you're frustrated. So I had a lot of sympathy. At the time, I did not feel like ordaining women was what I would choose if I were in charge at the time. But I cried when she was excommunicated, and I listened to the debate between, the panel, the discussion that was on Mormon Stories podcast, and I was so happy the conversation was happening, and I identified very much with both sides and thought, if you're not invited into the meeting, you don't have say in what happens in the church. And in the current conditions, if you don't have the priesthood, you're not invited to the meeting. I identified with that, but I also thought, but maybe I do think, like, men and women are different and they have their different roles. I didn't know, but I loved that the conversation was happening. And I was sad when I saw it go into meanness and pettiness and attacks. I hate that. I never appreciate or condone that at all. I don't know.
Recently, I interviewed Greg Prince again for Mormon Stories, and he made this comment that was really alarming to a lot of my listeners, and especially to my friend Kate Kelly, where he basically said that ordained women set Mormon feminism back 20, 30 years, whatever he said. I didn't respond at the time, partly because I don't like to be adversarial to my guests, but also because I was running out of time in that interview and had some other things I really wanted to talk about, but it wasn't because I agreed with it. I'm just curious, as you've seen the church's changes since then, do you see it differently than kind of what Greg said? How would you see, have you seen a positive impact come from ordained women, or at least associated with ordained women? Or would you even know?
In a lot of ways, I wouldn't know, to be honest. I don't know that. I saw the church dig their heels in pretty hard. I saw people around me. I mean, I would say, and I live in a fairly liberal pocket of Mormons and progressive women, and I think ordained women was seen as quite radical. So I can understand Greg Prince having that point of view. I don't see that it set Mormon feminism back. I don't know what he was saying. I think it's unfortunate that I thought it was unfortunate that the church dug its heels in. I think it's unfortunate that when women speak that way, that there is such, like, be careful with your tone, don't yell, don't be shrill, don't be too demanding. I think it's really unfortunate. I think it's the world we live in, and so I think she was pretty out there for a lot of people, and so for a lot of people, that's a deal breaker and they'll shut you off. And I think that's unfortunate, and that might be what happened. I definitely don't think she set Mormon feminism back. I think those discussions are really important, and I think it did get people's attention that wouldn't have been listening otherwise, because they'll only listen when the kid starts to yell, so.
That's what Margaret Toscano talked about sitting in the back seat
Yes.
of the car and
Yes,
shouting and being hot and the parents not listening, right?
Yes, exactly.
And you raise your voice louder and louder, right?
That's right. And if you're not heard, like, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you think about the historical figures like those Boston statues that you really connected with, how were they perceived at the time they were by the public as they were advocating for the things they were advocating for?
I think certainly. So Abigail Adams was interesting to me because she was brilliant. She had such a sharp mind, and the excerpt that was part of the statue that was on the plaque of her statue was a letter that she wrote to her husband John Adams when he had just become president. And she said, I wish I could remember it word for word, but she said, I hope that that your policies will be more favorable to the ladies than your ancestors have been. And so she recognized that he was in a position of power and she wasn't, but that she had his ear back at home and she would use her influence that way. But she wrote a lot. I think she was actually very well respected and regarded. Phyllis Wheatley was an African-American slave, so she was the first, I believe she was the first African-American to publish literature, I think. Does that sound right? Of either gender, and it was a woman, and she was a poet. And I know George Washington regarded her poetry beautifully, and I think she was well regarded too. Maybe these were anomalies, because I think typically they're not, right? They're seen as harsh. Lucy Stone was was a contemporary of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and they for sure were way ahead of their time and were just the heads that were bashing against the drawbridge, trying to get it to come down. They got bashed pretty badly, I think, those those 19th century suffragists. I think there's a place for them. I do. I think.
How about they're essential?
They're essential. Totally. Totally. It wouldn't happen otherwise. Totally. That's right. That's right.
I'm not trying to lead you, but I think about just what have we seen in the past few years? Women are praying in General Conference now. Women are no longer sort of off to the side of General Conference. They've sort of been brought more front and center. Now we have like quasi-leadership for women missionaries. The missionary age for women have all come down. You can wear pants to church, and I'm sure I'm missing 1,000 things, but that's what I wish I would have said to Greg Prince is those are like really big changes all happening coincidentally, like in the past. Even the women's conference now being sort of lumped in together with General Conference and streaming the women's conference or streaming the priesthood, it just feels like there's been massive change. But I am now injecting myself into your story.
That's okay. No, I think that's great. And I do think that those changes have, I guess what I'm saying is I see ordained women as being a part of that, of what was happening with feminist Mormon housewives and with, by common consent, all the blogs, all of the feminists that in this third wave have happened and have correlated just as a blessing to me with my own kind of feminist awakening. And I kind of was on the sidelines just as a, as a receptor of all of that and benefiting from it hugely and just grateful again for each voice speaking and saying, here's what I think. I think that combination of voices has been what has moved things along. And like I said, I think that people like Joan of Arc, right? You just go into a forest and say God and God within me, right? Like whatever divine spirit is out there and inside of me, what should I do during this brief time I have in my life? And hopefully that moves things forward. So
I remember the Natalie McBain sort of response to Kate Kelly and Ordained Women, which I would articulate as priesthood is a bridge too far, but what can we ask for that's reasonable? It's like, let the women handle the money, let the women hold the baby when the blessing happens, lower the missionary age. And I think maybe part of what Greg was saying was that there were other forces that were influential, not just Kate's, kind of the Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X kind of dichotomy, that
totally.
Nyland was the good feminist and Kate was the bad feminist. And of course, my reading of history is that the more strident voices create the space and the attention and the interest in the softer voices. That Malcolm X in some ways gave Martin Luther King more power, and that maybe Kate Kelly gave Nyland more, I don't know, and all the other people that you mentioned that kind of factored in, because we're talking about decades of Mormon feminism, not just like the past 4 or 5 or 10 years. But did you have, and do you have a reaction to Nyland's sort of approach? Was that important to you? Is that kind of where you are, or how did you experience, and how do you experience that approach?
My reaction to it was, again, I think we benefit when lots of different voices are speaking from their authentic point of view. And I really respected Nyland McBain's. I love that she uses data. I love that she does research. I love that I do feel like she has a lot of love and charity, and I really respect her. I think she's so articulate too. I think, and so to me, I think do I agree with everything she says? Probably not. But I do think she would be more comparable to I don't know. I was gonna say that it's one step along the path that will eventually lead to egalitarianism. Right now, that is what I would say feels right to me. That low-hanging fruit, the kind of easier things that don't require doctrinal changes, like the ones you listed, are a great step to me in the right direction. They're an important step, and that is all a lot of people are ready for right now. So I think that has a really important place. It's not threatening. It's less threatening, I guess. It's less threatening to people. And if, I don't know what the end game is. And I think any woman or man, right? All of us in the church might have a different vision of what it would be. And some people think it's perfect just the way it is right now. And some people thought it was perfect the way it was, I guess, 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I don't think it's perfect the way it is right now. But I don't know. But I appreciate everybody contributing to the conversation.
So before, you wrote an article about what now? What was it called?
The Dear Mormon Man article?
After that. Something about women and what do we do now?
Oh, right. My follow-up to...
What was it called?
It was called Dear Mormon Woman, What Do We Do Now?
Yeah, what do we do now?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
So before we jump there, I don't know a ton about Eric, your husband. I don't know a ton about kind of where he is or his concerns, but what I do know is that stereotypically the men's issues tend to be more historical and truth claim stuff, and generalizing, women tend to care more about kind of social issues and practical issues and the lived experience. But I read enough of, I read your essays, but I could tell from the Dear Mormon Man essay that you've confronted the truth claims and the historical stuff, kind of the stuff that would be found in many Mormon Stories episodes, the stuff that would be in CES letter about polyandry, and I'm sure you've read about Book of Mormon historicity and Book of Abraham stuff. And so before we talk to kind of what now and what you would like to see and where you would like to see things go and your future in the church, did truth claim stuff factor in at all to your journey? Has it impacted how you view things now? Did you ever even consider, like, this is all garbage and throw it all away and I'm just leaving this steaming pile of junk? Or did you, and if you did work through all that stuff, how did you work through it?
Yeah, it did. It did definitely. Yes, I did read all of it.
Talk us through it.
Yeah.
Talk us through that.
A little at a time, and I think it's typical. Again, not every woman feels this way, but I think it's fairly typical for Mormon women to have some amount of anxiety about polygamy from the time they learn it. That there's always a little bit of fear that it's going to be practiced in the afterlife, and we'll ask each other, like, would you do that? Maybe men do it too. Like, if it's like the test of faith that you kind of like, would you go with the prophet, or would you, and there's anxiety there a lot. And like I mentioned before, that played into this feeling of like that the afterlife might not be a heaven that I was interested in, and that God was not fair and not just and not loving. So learning that Joseph Smith, learning the circumstances of the polyandry that went on, was like a lot of these other things where the truth sets you free, but it's both liberating and devastating at the same time. And I did have that experience for sure. Learning about that, I thought, again, what I believe and what felt right to me was it's felt wrong all these years because it is wrong, morally wrong, what happened. And that was a relief.
Polygamy or polyandry or both?
Both.
Polygamy is, so 132.
Yeah, no.
D&C 132 is a no for you?
It's a no. It's a no, John. Sorry. No, it's a no. It feel, how, and then to quote a part of the Doctrine and Covenants that does feel right to me, which I totally cherry pick, just like how I read the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, I go, wow, that feels true, that resonates with me. That does not. That's kind of how I read my Mormon scriptures now too. Because D&C also says, it says you'll know in your heart and your mind, right?
Oh. God
communicates with you through your heart and your mind. And polygamy felt polyandry, all of that felt wrong in my heart. But I thought that I had to accept it in my mind because it went along with the keystone and that it all has to be true, right? But I knew it, I felt in my heart that it was not right, that it insulted my soul as a woman. And then once I learned in my mind, like, that at least my interpretation, and some people know the very same facts and interpret them differently and say God did call Joseph Smith to have those relationships just the way they happened, and I don't feel that way. And so once I found that out, it was a huge relief, because that helped me salvage my relationship with God, knowing he didn't do that. And the thing that bugs me so much too about the discussions that happen about the polyandry is that so infrequently is it people always talk about, was that right or wrong for Joseph to do? And people don't even talk about who was Fanny Alger, this 16-year-old, I think, at the time, or who were these women and how that impacted their lives. And it always felt to me like God cared more about Joseph and whether it was right or wrong for him, and the people analyzing it cared more about whether it was right or wrong for Joseph to do that than they did about, was it right or wrong for that woman to have that happen to her, to have that happen in her life. The whole thing felt wrong always. And so then when I learned how it had all happened, I thought God was not behind that. Phew! Then I can trust God, because he wouldn't do that. So it was a relief. And then to know that he lied about it also. And that was, again, like totally crushing for me. And then also liberating, because I thought, okay, like those things that have felt wrong, then I got to align myself back up with my head and my heart to God and say, like, if something feels wrong in your heart and it doesn't make sense in your mind, and it doesn't matter which human is telling you that it's divine, that I have the right to trust my own heart and mind. And if something feels wrong, then and if I'm wrong too, I've tried to stay humble about that too, where I'll meet my maker after this life, and there will be lots of things I will have been wrong about, and that's fine with me. But all I have to go on is my own conscience. All I have to go on is my own perception and what I perceive to be God talking to me. I have to be true to that. And it can be even a prophet, or even a temple president, even anybody, a human being. I'm sorry, but I trust my own judgment on that. So I've been able to discard the stuff that doesn't feel right to me. And that's helped me, like I said, keep my relationship with God and my self-respect, which is helpful also.
So I love the fact that God becomes salvaged for you, because that's important to you.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is you're sort of saying, well, Joseph lied or made it all up, or he was in error. And sections of now, not only Mormon scripture, but of a huge chunk of our history, you're now sort of just saying, wrong, rejecting that.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you add to that what you probably know about Book of Mormon historicity and Book of Abraham, how have you salvaged Joseph Smith in your mind? How have you salvaged the church, prophetic authority, priesthood? If all of a sudden major things are problematic, how have you salvaged the rest of it?
Yeah, so hard. It's a daily process for me. And Eric, yes, has been on a similar journey. And just as you described, his triggers that were more problematic for him, that he had to wrestle through more, were the truth claims and the history and stuff, though he was really, really sympathetic to the feminist issues and vice versa. So we've gone through our faith transitions kind of like this, sometimes syncing up and sometimes not. But to answer your other question, what do you salvage if you choose to, right? Like I did feel a lot come crashing down at different points. You know, a different pillar would fall and I'd go, oh, I didn't know. You know, you didn't even know until you feel it fall and you cry for a while. Where I am now is that, like, I guess I kind of said that there is so much goodness. There's so much goodness in most faith traditions. And like I said, I love comparative religions. And so I take goodness wherever I can find it. And I discard error wherever I find it. And giving myself permission to do that has made it so I can still put on my dress or my pants and go to church on Sunday. Knowing that I've shifted that authority from outside of me to myself, that we call it, like Eric and I will say, like, you put on your own backpack and you decide what you pick up and put in your backpack. And you look at everything and you say, not that one, but that one, you know. And so I guess that's how I still can read the Book of Mormon and find amazing, beautiful passages that, for example, like the passages on charity have been effective in my life in helping me forgive people who have hurt me. And I'll take that from anywhere I can get it. And so I don't care as much. I went through a period because I cared so much that it was true, you know. And then I had to go through a period of like, what? And now I just think I don't care that much whether it was historically true. If it's good, if it helps me be a better person, then I'll apply it in my lived daily life. But I don't care much about, like, did this thing happen on this date in this particular way? When people lie, though, I do believe in God, and I believe that we each meet him face to face, and we'll all answer if we lied about stuff. You're in, you know, if you lied about stuff, you're in trouble. But I'm not getting taken for a ride anymore, I guess, on people's having to accept something that I don't believe is true. I don't do that anymore.
But it sounds like where a lot of people go is like, it's all a fraud, and Joseph was a fraud, and the church isn't true. And how is it for you, if you weren't going to embrace that narrative, mm-hmm. what was Joseph and what is the church to you? And how do you avoid kind of that fraud mentality towards the church and towards Joseph?
I just I just am okay today. Sometimes I'm not okay. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm so angry that I can't wait for the afterlife, and I have choice words for him. Because I feel like he lied to me, because I based a lot of my life, and I suffered a lot because of those things. And
who lied to you?
Joseph Smith.
Okay.
Yes. So many people have suffered. So many women have not been able to achieve their potential in their life, and they believed things that turned out to be not true. It's upsetting to me. And then I just think, again, I'm going to let that be he's just a person, and I'm going to let that be his deal with God. What am I left with? I'm left with this church that in many ways feels like just like the relationship that I have with individual human beings, like my own family, or with any other human being, where there's a bunch of flaws, some of them hard to deal with, and then there's a bunch of good. And for me right now, I feel like the church gave me so much good and continues to. And part of that is, I think the ward that I live in right now particularly is so accepting and so loving, and the most godly people that I've ever met, and that makes it easier for me, for sure, to live out my spiritual life in the context of that community and in the context of the religion of my family and of my ancestors. And that was precious to me as a little girl, folding my Book of Mormon in my lace pillowcase and saying, I'm a Mormon. And a lot of that is so positive to me that I don't want to walk away from it. And I care about it so much that I want to help make it better. I do. That's still where I am now. That's how I salvage it, is I just go, I'm not going to worry about individuals and whether they lied and whether it was wrong or right. I just, I guess what I'm choosing is the working laterally with other women, working in my word. Now, where those plates still bump up against each other are certain decisions, like I had my temple recommend interview a couple months ago. Do I want a temple recommend? Do I ever want to physically walk my body into that temple and sit through that again? No. And so do I choose to be honest with my bishop and say, and I totally was. Those are the choices, like on a daily basis, or.
And my guess is, because you're in a progressive stake, that there are stake presidents and bishops that are like, you can still have a temple recommend. You don't need to literally believe.
No.
No?
But that's okay.
Meaning you weren't allowed? Like you tried but were denied?
No, well, what I said, I think it happened. I feel so great about the way things happened, because I could have just not, I knew my recommend expired. The last time I went to the temple was a horrible experience for me personally, because I said yes. I thought, I'm going to try this again. This is like only a couple years ago. I fasted and prayed, and I'm like, if this is the way you want it, God, I will accept it. Even if I don't know how, right? Or even if I don't know the answer, right? I was trying to be Abrahamic about it. And I completely, I bowed my head and I said yes to a part that violated my integrity, saying yes to something that I tried to be an open vessel. I really did. I tried to open myself back up and said, if you want me to say yes to this, I will say yes. I tried again, John, I tried. And I got that same, like, it's wrong. And for me, I'm just saying what I experienced. I know that some people don't feel that way. That's what I felt. And I thought, I can never do that again. That violates my integrity. And I wrote about this in a different essay, but I prayed about it a lot afterwards, and I felt God just say, don't you ever say yes to something that you know to say no to again. I just felt like we're good, and I felt like we're good. So now I've forgotten the original question. Oh yeah. So I told that to the bishop, and to my bishop, and I cried and cried. Nothing makes me fall apart. Like, again, it just kind of reduces me to like the hopes that I had when I was a kid of what it was all going to mean. And I just didn't want it to be this way. And it makes me so sad. But I decided to be honest. And he just listened, and he said the most beautiful thing, which was, he said, I think that anything that I would say right now would dishonor your authenticity and your willingness to be vulnerable. I don't even want to say anything. I just want to tell you thank you for being so honest and open with me. Can you think of a more beautiful? I mean, he was a great listener, and he said, let me see if I can get you a recommend, because I personally am still keeping all the rules. I'm not interested in, any of those Mormon rules. I'm not interested in breaking any of them, me personally. And I said, and I'm doing the best I can, and I'm good with God. So do I feel worthy to go to the temple? Totally, because I'm doing my best. Will I ever do that again? No. And garments are another thing that's like psychologically traumatizing for me. I did it for a long time, and it would make me like cry, and just was so hard for me. And so that's another thing that I was like, I don't know if I can do it. And he asked the stake president and said, if can I issue a recommend if this is the circumstance? And he came back and he said, I'm so sorry, but I can't. And I said, that's fine. It just felt so good to be honest, actually, that I was happy about that, because I know I'm good with God, and because I'm doing my best, and because I was honest, and because he was such a great listener. I felt like the whole experience was just lovely, actually. So that's fine.
I love that story. And I love that you're willing to talk about it. So thank you. It's now like bringing back all my stuff from a couple of years ago. And one of the big things for me, sort of where I drew the line, was I refuse to be a second-class citizen in my church.
Yeah.
And I think this comes to the forefront maybe more immediately for men than women in the church. I don't know, but like all of a sudden you can't baptize your kid.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, and it's a public shaming because everyone's asking, why aren't you baptizing? Or you can't ordain your kid to the priesthood, your son, or you don't feel like you want to, or that it's ethical, or like your nephew goes to the temple and to get married and you are sitting outside all of a sudden. And so the ordinances were the first trigger for me, but then the temple stuff came later. And for me, I felt like I wanted to draw that line in the sand and just say, I will stay, but I will not be a second-class citizen, because it's so publicly shaming. And because I don't want to be a second-class citizen. So has that occurred to you? Have you had to sit outside the temple? Has your husband not been able to perform some of the ordinances? Or have you just not faced that yet? Because for us, that was a really big deal.
I bet. Yeah, it is. It is different. That's true. Women are able to slide under the radar longer. You're right, because we don't have those public benchmarks that people would see. That's an interesting point I've never thought of before. We have not. My husband baptized my son because it was more about worthiness, I think. Whether that's for good or bad, I mean, whether that's even a legitimate way to judge worthiness in the Mormon world. He too, like, we personally are just great being, those squeaky clean Mormons is fine for us. And so that did make it a little easier. And yes, it totally occurs. I feel like I am being, as a woman, I do know what it feels like to be a second-class citizen. I do.
Oh, of course you do.
I do.
That's like all 40 of your years or whatever.
Correct. Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. And that's why.
I knew that, but I had to ask.
No, I know. No, I do. I feel sometimes like I'm right on the fulcrum of the teeter-totter, right? It swings like, I can't do it. I mean, that was my article, right? I'm not doing this anymore. I really didn't know if I'd ever go back in the building. I thought, I can't. And I have got these 3 daughters. Like, I don't like them being in the subtle ways that sometimes they're not subtle, but like the temple I don't think is subtle at all. But even in our ward, in the ways that it is apparent that it's not an egalitarian system. It's not. It is a patriarchy where the men have the power to tell the women how it's going to be. And I don't agree with it. And it's really hard to keep going. And I have to right now what I'm doing is just connecting with God and saying, I know I'm not a second-class citizen. And I also know that everybody in here, again, speaking of my own church community and the family and really the church community in which I was raised too, I just see so many people trying so hard. My dad was just made a bishop in his ward, and I was with him yesterday, and I was so touched by his humility, and he just wants to do the right thing. He wants to help people. He was talking about like that he wants to be a good listener and how can I help people the most. I just think I love supporting good people. So it's super hard. but I'm still in it for those reasons. I would say I want to help. I want to help it. I want to support people. And my bishop's been so lovely too about saying, you know, about certain things that I've brought up. I'd never thought about it before. Thank you for saying that, because it's been a bit of a blind spot for him. And he has a daughter who's a feminist in college now, and she's asking me questions that I'd never really thought about before. And while he might not be aligned with my viewpoint, it helps him go like, okay, now I know a little bit more about what she might be experiencing. I just still feel like I want to be there to offer my voice, because the people that I'm around are telling me that they still love me. And even if they don't agree with me, and some of them might be listening to this, so I am feeling a little anxiety, like, I'm being so honest, right? But they've told me that they love me, and I believe them. And I am learning so much from them too. That's the thing too. I'm not like, I'm learning much more from them too than they're learning from me. I feel humbled to be with such wonderful people. So.
How have you, like, you spoke with a lot of emotion about your daughters, not wanting them to be subjected to the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at your Dear Mormon Man article, they're living that.
Yeah.
Still, none of that's really changed. How have you become okay raising your daughters in the patriarchy?
Yeah. For one thing, like I've talked about today a little bit, just observing the arc of history and seeing like each phase from way back all the way through, you know, European history, and then our little spot, you know, Mormonism starting, interestingly, like right around, the Saints arrived in Salt Lake, like right around the same time as the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, right? Like just seeing our spot in it, I already can see things have moved forward from the time I was little in the 70s. That, I mean, we are still behind the rest of the country, but they have moved forward. That's one thing that gives me hope. The other thing is I have not talked to my daughters about feminism on purpose. For good or bad, I just didn't, because I was trying to figure it out, and I didn't want to hand them burdens at a young age that would weigh their childhood down.
How old's your oldest?
15, turning 16 soon.
Wow.
Yeah, but they've picked up on it, either from me that it was more in my conversation than I realized, or just who they are. The lovely thing that is reassuring to me is that, like I described at the very beginning, I was picking up messages but didn't know it. And only in hindsight could I see all of those messages and could write about it. They know from the very beginning they're carrying their own backpack. My daughters will sit in the meeting and look at me like, you know, they'll hear things and be like, no way, that I would never have questioned. I just was a sponge. I totally absorbed everything, and it was very black and white. It's all true or it's not. They are such more nuanced thinkers and critical thinkers than I was at their age. I think because Eric and I have given them those tools from a young age just to question things no matter what the source is. At school, what you read, be thinking about it, weigh it in your heart. Anyway, they're much better equipped, and they're already, you know, they're much better equipped. They call themselves feminists without me even, I didn't know they knew what that was. And Lindsay, my oldest, chose, like in 6th grade, she had to do a research project, and she did the project on the Seneca Falls Women's Convention. And I was like, how do you, really? She's like, Mom, yeah, like I'm a feminist, of course I am. And I thought, I was really trying to not, I didn't want to push anything on them, because I've tried to be humble enough to think like, maybe it's just me.
It's still you.
I don't know.
It's still back on
maybe,
you.
I guess. But it makes me happy that they've come to that on their own.
Sure.
And that I don't.
Yeah.
I really don't think
that you don't make your agenda your kid's agenda.
I didn't want to do that. Yeah. Right. But they've grown up really empowered and with their eyes much more open. And it helps that the church is much more open, and we also do damage control. If we're in a sacrament meeting where stuff is said, or even hymns, right? Like hymns that are sung, and I'll just elbow them, and our family doesn't sing that verse. And they're like, great. Like, we have to be true to ourselves. Our family doesn't sing praise to the man. Our family doesn't sing the last verse of we thank thee, O God, for a prophet, and stuff like that, where I'm like, that violates my integrity. We don't do that. We don't do that. Got it?
We don't go to the temple.
That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one.
So what if, I can think of two scenarios. What if they decide to get married, serve a mission, get married at the temple?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if they leave the church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell me what I should do, John. No, I'm just kidding. I trust. I mean, what if so many things in this world? That's one of the many what if so many things. It's going to be a mixed bag. We have really tried to teach our kids, again, to know what their own conscience feels like, to know that yucky feeling inside that, when you tell a lie or when you are unkind to someone, you give in to temptation to say something mean and you gossip, and you know what that feels like. That's wrong. And then you know what hard feels like, but it's right, and there's that different kind of resistance where you're like, this is hard, I don't want to do this, but I can do that. I'm just trying to give them the tools, and then it will be their life and their decision. And so if I have children that go, I love Mormonism and I love everything about it, and I will be telling my kids what to expect in the temple before they go, because that's one of my big problems with the temple, is that you make a covenant that no one tells you beforehand. We don't do that with baptism. We don't do that with any other covenants. Why do we do that in the temple? You're not allowed to know what you're promising before you go there.
Because it's a Masonic ritual.
I guess that's why, right? Yeah, that's right. It is. So they'll know. I'll walk them through it and say, here's what you're going to say. If you want to marry this boy who's a Mormon boy, their daddy's a Mormon boy. All the men in their life that they love are Mormon men, and that would be wonderful if they married a Mormon man in the temple, and I've had a great life. So if they choose that, I'll be thrilled. That's great. They'll know, though, and what I will tell them is, here's what they're going to say. If you think that's wrong, and I think it's wrong, and you say no. You don't have to make a scene about it, but don't you ever violate your integrity. You just say no, and when you hear the part pass that, like, here's your promise, men, and here's your promise, women, you can just go.
You write that. Bow your head and say no, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they'll be able to do that. Nobody told me that, and I think I would have saved, 10 good years of, anguish. I would not have had that if someone had just said, just say no.
Just bow your head and say no.
Just say no. It never occurred to me that I could just say, no, yeah.
Nobody's listening to hear how you answer.
Right. Only God. That's all who that's the only person whose business
bow your head and say no.
Yeah. They can. They should. We teach them that in every other way, right? Like if someone tempts you to do something else, or defames, if someone is talking, saying something racist or something, you stand up. You do not just sit there and go along with something you know is wrong. It applies across everything. So I'll be okay. And if they get married in the temple and I can't go, I don't know, we'll work it out. Or if they leave the church, I will understand. If they stay in the church, I will understand. All I hope is that they have integrity and that they are moral people and they know how to work hard and they know how to respect and love everybody. And that they know that everything is going to be nuanced and messy and complicated. And if they go to a different faith community looking for perfection and ease and, they might find a better fit. That would be fine. But I'm just saying nothing's perfect, and no community is going to be tailor-made to the way you want it, because everybody makes concessions in a community. Everybody does. You can go live on a rock by yourself. I wouldn't want that for them. I don't know. It's a tricky balancing act.
Sure.
And we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, too. But I just think you can get good and give good almost anywhere.
I keep wanting to say one more question and then more come out, but can you envision a scenario where the formula shifts? Like, let's say Eric comes to you at some point and says, I just can't do it anymore. I just can't go.
Or I do to him.
Right.
Which is, yeah.
So, I mean, is that something that's even like it could end differently, and maybe at some point you guys say we just can't do it anymore? Is that even in your realm of possibility? I'm not trying to prime you for that.
It's okay. No, I don't feel primed for it.
Yeah.
That's a legitimate question, and totally it's in the realm of possibility. It's so painful for me sometimes. And that's why I wrote the article, is because there was just a series of things that had happened that the pain became so acute that it was like a featherweight of a straw. One straw is very light. And that last thing that happened was not a big deal. So it was weird to observe my own reaction. Like, whoa, that wasn't a big deal. Why are you having a full out fit about it? So I know what that feels like, to get really close to that and just think, I can't, it hurts too much, and and the dissonance, and I'm so tired. I get fatigued of hearing so many things that I don't believe or feel are wrong, or yeah, I can see that happening.
Okay.
Or I can see myself also, on my deathbed going like, I don't know, I did what I thought was best each day at a time. I hope this was okay.
Yeah.
Either way, I think that's what I'll say.
As I kind of took some multicultural classes, some diversity classes in my PhD, I learned about this idea of privilege. And, there's so much privilege that maybe you and I have, in the sense that we're white, so we don't have to worry about all that. Well, we can worry about the racism stuff, but I mean, it's not going to penetrate us as directly as it would a person of color.
Right.
And we're cisgendered, and we're straight, and I'm assuming things about you, but
yeah, no, that's right.
But straight, cisgendered, upper middle class, educated. Now you're a female, so you do fit one major, and an intellectual. So there are a couple of minority groups, or in the case of female, majority group, that are highly problematic. But there's a lot of privilege.
That's right.
That comes with your profile. But then you add to that, you're freaking in Stanford, like Palo Alto. If my guess is that if you were in Draper or Sandy or Logan, you might have had a very different bishop and a very different stake president and a very different experience with your ward. Not to mention the fact that maybe you'll have a gay or lesbian kid at some point. And so to what extent have you thought about how much privilege is a factor in allowing you to stay right now, and the idea that are you comfortable staying, knowing that privilege is a big part of what enables that?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally, because the policy change last year hit me really hard too. And we were in California for Prop 8. No, those were total pain points for us too, of deciding whether we could have our names associated with the church, because in solidarity with brothers and sisters that we want to be supportive of, and we don't want to be complicit in something that harms someone else, even if we aren't part of their group. Totally, that's on our minds a lot, and that was a hard thing. It's still a hard thing whenever I think about it. For the reasons I said, I still have. It's still the scale.
It's like a formula,
and
the balance
like
right
the
now
balance.
still tips. I don't mean to finish your sentence, but the balance tips towards staying for now, and it could change.
That's right. And that's the other. You mentioned the election, and we have said if Trump wins, we're moving to Canada. Since the beginning, right? And my little 8-year-old, a couple months ago, came into the kitchen. He was like, "So, are we really moving to Canada if he wins? And my 15-year-old was in the kitchen, and this was a few months ago, and I hadn't thought this yet, and I was so humbled and proud of her. And she said, Stone, if Trump wins, it's all the more important for us to stay, because there are people here. It won't affect us because we're privileged, because of where we live and who we are, but it will impact. So my kids went to a Spanish immersion school where the majority are Spanish-speaking immigrant families that we are friends with, because my kids go to school with them, and it's a neighboring ward to us. Those people are our friends and our people. And she said, then we stay to help them. They're going to need people to stay and fight alongside them because they don't have the privilege. And I, was so proud of her. And that's not to diminish. By using that analogy, I have 2 sisters who've left the church. I have many friends who've left the church, and I don't know how the scale will be for me right now. The choice that feels right to me is, I think if I can, I'd like to help the church be less painful, even if that just means that I, sit by the gay member of my ward and say, if you want to be here, I will sit with you. And then it gives me meaning and purpose to show up still. But you're right. You're right about the privilege. You're right about living in the Bay Area. We have firesides. Like, do you know about Jeff Wise and the firesides that he's doing? Bob Reese is in the area too, and he's come down and given firesides on gay, straight alliance and awareness, and being aware of our brothers and sisters who are feeling marginalized. It does make it easier.
It's a very liberal friendly.
It is.
Ward and stake. Right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And that you're right. I don't know what it would be like if I do, because I have lived other places, and what did feel lonely, and it was very hard.
Yeah. Well, enjoy it while you can do it.
Right.
And maybe it'll last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good things are happening there. That's also maybe why I am maybe more hopeful than someone else that you might talk to. Because I do see those good things happening. And so I do feel a lot of hope. And they accept, that's the thing too, is like, they accept me for all of my flaws and ways that I'm wrong and different views. Because even my stake is more conservative than even the stake to the north of me. And I have big frustrations, and even some of my best friends don't share my frustrations. They don't share my points of view. But it does function really beautifully, kind of like a Christian community, the way you would hope it would.
Are you comfortable, just really briefly, you've talked about garments and temple attendance. Are you comfortable talking about how tithing fits in your backpack?
Maybe not.
Okay.
Well, yes, I will. I don't earn money right now, and I don't pay tithing. I will say, because I don't earn money, we really believe in tithing as a principle. I love the concept of not getting attached to material things. It comes in, it goes out. It's really good for character as far as what institutions you choose to give that money to as it goes out. I'll just answer for myself, and because I don't make money, I can just not go there. That's maybe Eric's to answer, and I don't want to answer for him. But we really, really do like to help as we can, and I do love it as a theory, as a principle. Yeah.
Cool.
But that's another sticking point of deciding what to do, for sure, for people.
So last question, I think, maybe second to the last question, but so what now? Well, what was the reaction to the article you published? Was there a reaction both in your ward, with family, and then, how did people respond to the article? And then what about going forward for you and for feminism in the church? What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. The article was, I joined.
Actually, describe the article really quickly.
Sure. Okay.
Just what it tries to do.
Yeah. So I had started writing this article a couple of years prior, when I had, kind of brainstormed with my husband and thought about, I love literature and the power of reading something from a different point of view, engendering empathy in a way that you wouldn't get from your lived experience. If you have never met a person from a particular place, you wouldn't have the opportunity to develop empathy for them because it's outside your experience. And what I kept observing, even among like friends of mine, like the conversation by the pool with my friend, it's like, I've never thought of that. Or what I kept seeing in men was that they'd never thought really too hard about it, the perspective of a woman. And sometimes even really great men that I love were kind of dismissive about like women's issues, kind of like with an eye roll. And so that was why I thought if I could use a good literary device effectively, I would love to be able to help them see what I've experienced. And so when that idea came to me, like, ooh, I could flip it and invite a man to inhabit the experience of a little boy in a parallel universe where it's just everything's flipped. And so then when, this thing happened in my ward and with my calling, which again was not a big enough deal to be a big deal, but it was the last straw for me, I couldn't stop it from being written. Whereas I had tried it before and gotten bogged down several times. I had a paper due for a class in school, and I couldn't write that paper. I had to write this other article. It just came pouring out of me. I worked on it for a couple of weeks. And yeah, I tried to, what I really tried to do is I tried not to insert too much of my feelings or opinions, honestly. I know I did sometimes, but in the majority, I really tried to just flip it. And sometimes it felt like, I'm exaggerating. This can't be what it is. And I'd flip it back and be like, no, I'm not. That's actually exactly the wording, or that's actually exactly what happens. So I published it on Medium and didn't think anyone would read it.
And so basically, it's to a man growing up, a boy, retelling the Mormon church experience, but with all the main characters, instead of being men, being women. So God's a female, primary God's a female, the priesthood goes to women, the Book of Mormon and Bible prophets are primarily women. You even change the names, Nephi or whatever.
Yeah, Nephina or something cheesy like that.
Right, Josephina Smith.
Yeah, Josephine. Yeah.
And so but it's exhaustive. And I'm gonna disclose something here that I think you're gonna love, but it's gonna embarrass me. But I do that all the time on Mormon Stories. When I first started reading it, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Okay, yeah, I've thought of this before. And then I read a little bit more, and I'm like, no, she's really going into the depth here. Like, this is really like taking it to another level. But then I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, I'm midway, 3/4 way through it. I'm like, I get it. Like, you've made your point. And then I thought, if I'm sick of this 3/4 of the way through reading an essay, what's it like to live it for 40 years? Do you like that?
Yeah, I do.
Do you like that?
Very validating. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Actually.
So read it all the way through.
Push yourself through to the end. That's right. Oh, it got so long. That was the thing too. It's really long.
It is long.
It's really long. And on Medium, you can see like how many minutes it'll take you to read. And I thought so many people will just pull it up and go, no thanks, 17-minute read, too long. And there's but that's the thing, is Eric's like, what's the TLDR, right? TLDR, too long, didn't read. Like, what's the condensed version? Not that he needed it. He would listen and has listened for years of this. But like for a person who just wants the nutshell, and precisely to your point, I said, that's the point. There isn't. I want to take you through. I don't want there to be a short, and actually that was the short version, the 17-minute. I thought of so many things afterwards that I forgot to put in. Or my friend called me actually and said, like, how did you leave out knowing that, like, the flipped version would be like the boy finding out that men used to be able to give priesthood
Right.
blessing, and
Bless,
that was revoked.
a gift given, a gift taken away.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I forgot to put that in there, and couldn't believe I'd forgotten that. So that was one of the big ones that I left out. So there could be a longer version. Yeah. So that's a good summary of it. Was just flip the gender, same universe, and just flip it. And it was eye-opening for me to write it too, as it just kept coming and kept coming. And it was really therapeutic, actually, to think like, well, no wonder it felt difficult and dissonant and hard. It's hard. And that's the point. That was my point, was I don't know the answers. I don't know. The main point I wanted to make is, dear Mormon man, to my dad, to my brother, to my brothers-in-law, to my dear bishop, mostly to these good Mormon men. And most of the Mormon men in my life have been so dear and so good and such good intentions. It's hard. It's hard being a woman in patriarchy. It's hard. So be patient when somebody starts to yell from the back of the car. Be patient if someone's crying. Be patient if someone's screaming about it. Be patient. Some people are so, dismissive of like the women wearing pants. What are they doing? I just wanted to invite men into the world and take a minute to consider that it's not easy. So I don't really have answers. It was just hopefully a thought experiment that would provoke a little more empathy. And that was the most gratifying part of it. When it did become pretty well read, the most gratifying comments to me, there was one especially from a guy that I grew up with who was a few years older than me. And he just messaged it was actually on his Facebook page that said, "Thanks, I'm listening." And that just meant the world to me. Like, thank you for showing me this. I'm listening to you. I think that's so helpful as the most important first step whenever anybody is struggling. And he said it helped him understand his wife better, and it helped him see his sisters, and it helped him. So that was really rewarding for me to think that it did kind of open men's eyes, because those that wanted to were able to in a different way. I hope that was what my hope was. So,
any negative blowback at all?
Not from anyone I know personally. Like, that was my first experience. I'm not active on social media really, because I don't like, again, like antagonistic energy really turns me off. And so getting comments, like, I don't know if you read the comment section after the essay, but lots of people commented, and that was my first time getting, like, having people who don't know me at all make pretty harsh judgments about me and misunderstand me completely. And it was hard, but then I just thought, well, if I do want to be a writer, which I do, I love to write, and I do want to enter this realm a little bit more, I have to have thick skin. Everybody I admire has thick skin. Those women, the statues, everybody who does anything in the world and puts themselves out there my sister was so great from, Brene Brown. She said, "You're daring greatly, you're in the ring." And so I've had really great supportive friends and family, again, who don't necessarily agree with me, but have said, "You're doing your thing and you're speaking your truth. And yeah, people are going to be mean to you, so be tough." And that's helped. So, yeah, it's been great.
We either get thick skin or we cry in private.
Or both, right? Or probably both. Yeah. You can cry and still have thick skin. If you go back to it, it means you're tough, right? You cry, but then you go back to it.
Or a masochist.
Oh. Or that. I've only done this a little while. I'm not as seasoned as you are at this, but.
Oh, I'm clueless. So what about going forward? Like, for you, is what you hope for women getting the priesthood and full equality, egalitarianism? Are you even working towards that? Is that your aim? Do you have an aim? What's in the future for you and for feminism? What do you want from the church? What if you could paint the Martin Luther King sort of like I have a dream. I've seen the future, and
yeah.
Do you even have a vision that you would want, that you're comfortable articulating?
I wish I did, and maybe I will. Maybe I will. For today, I would say, that my hopes for women in the church are that we, first of all, honor our own authority, that we honor our conscience, that we honor our voices, that we speak out. That's the first thing that I would like to see, is for little girls to be raised that way, and that it persists into adulthood, that it doesn't disappear once you get married, that women can feel comfortable and give themselves permission and not wait for permission from the patriarchy too, if you feel moved to communicate with your Heavenly Mother, or if you, all the goodness, if you feel goodness leading you, that you can do it and you don't need permission from a man. I feel like patriarchy keeps women in the role of children too often, that boys and girls experience this equally, I think, as like having the parents over them, and then boys move past it and girls don't get to, because they still have, in many marriages, their husband presides over them and they accept that, and there are just layers of men that preside. I think even if we stay in a church where men are offered are the only ones who have the priesthood, I think in marriages I'd like to see that change in marriages, that women say, no, it might stall things. It's slower to have an egalitarian marriage, because it would be easier for, say, like, the darker haired one gets to pick. That speeds things up, but it's not fair. So I'd like to see women take that first, like in marriages. That's my big hope. And then at church, to speak up for ourselves. The other thing I would like to see is boys being raised with the expectation of an egalitarian marriage, because what I also see sometimes is men who want to be the knight in shining armor, and then they have a very empowered wife, and then they don't quite know what to do with themselves. And someone that I love very much was really defending patriarchy and defending, the temple and the whole model, the one that I do not like at all, defending it vehemently, and said, I find that men feel lost and they don't know what to do, and they feel scared if they're not in charge. And I said, I think that if a man wants to be an alpha, he should get a dog, but not a wife. Like, you don't get to be the alpha of your wife. Play a sport where you can pound on people, get a dog, be a CEO. But there are plenty of ways to do that. But I think little boys also, if they're raised, and we see this in the secular world already. You see it where it's becoming, at least where I live, maybe not here as much, but it's becoming more acceptable in the secular world outside the church for a dad to be a stay-home dad, or to take turns with childcare, and there isn't just the expectation that the dad's going to feel good about himself because he brings home the money and takes care of the wife, and the wife will feel good about herself because she cooks and does the housework. That traditional model it's going the way of all the earth outside the church, and I'd like it to, for boys to feel empowered too, as they work side by side. That's what I'd like to see. Those are some of the things I'd like to see.
So in terms of like working towards changing the text in the temple ceremony, or women getting the priesthood, for you that's just that's kind of like, that's not going to be your area of concern.
I don't think it can be. I mean, I wrote my one little letter.
You agree with what Claudia said, right? Don't try and change. It sounds like you have internalized what Claudia said. Don't try and change the church.
I think that I will do what feels authentic to me at the time. And right now, what I feel like is everybody should do what feels authentic to you. Don't hide your light under a bushel and say what you want to say. And if someone feels their life calling is to try to change the church from the top down and get the temple script changed. I tried with my one little letter to Elder Holland and kind of went like, I don't want to do that again. And it just didn't seem to make any difference, but maybe someone wants to hammer on that. They want their head to be the one trying to knock down the door, to use that analogy again. That's not for me right now. I feel more hope and it fits into my life better also, and I just feel my heart saying, raise this next generation this way, talk to other women, keep writing, and maybe this new generation will age into positions within the church, not only empowered women, but also boys who have been raised going, maybe some boy will have one of the red chairs in General Conference and be one of those elders that will say, what's up with the temple thing, and be in a position to change it because society has moved them forward and they'll age into those positions. So that's what's feeling more inspiring to me at this moment, is the lateral work, rising a little at a time. But that's not to say that that's somebody else's calling. And I don't know what's in the future for me, but that's how I feel now.
All right. So we always like to end. This has been wonderful. We always like to end with you sharing final thoughts or testimony or belief. I think you've been doing that all along. So if you feel like you've said everything you want to say, that's fine. Do you have any closing testimony or values or sentiments that you want to leave with us to close?
Yeah, thanks. I think I have said mostly everything, but just to summarize, I very strongly believe in love and goodness, and I believe there's a source of it. And I would just say from my own experience and to anyone who's struggling, that whatever we have to do to just to keep our hearts open and turned toward love and turned toward goodness. I think of the primary song, have faith, that part of he sent his son, have faith, have hope, live like his son. And whether you believe, that Jesus Christ was literally the Son of God or not, to live a life of love and service and peace, have faith, have hope, live like his son, and help others on their way. And that's what I believe in, and what I'm trying to do. I do believe in those things, and I would say to have integrity. I believe in that too, and trusting our conscience and like Galileo said, I don't believe that the God who endowed us with reason wants us to forego its use, right? We have brains to think critically, and I think God wants us to do that too. That's part of us being divine creatures, to think and feel and help other people. So that's what I'm trying to do.
And in some alternative universe, live like her daughter.
That's it. Yeah. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah.
Maybe your next project can be rewriting the primary songs.
Oh gosh. Yeah. That's
from a
right.
female point of view.
Oh, wouldn't that be interesting?
What do you think?
Oh, that'd be interesting.
All right. Some enterprising listener out there.
Yeah.
Rewrite some primary songs from the female point of view.
Yeah. Fill it in. Fill in the other side. I'm actually fine with a male savior and a heavenly father, I guess, like I said before. Just there's that big empty void. Yeah, fill it in. Fill it in.
Savioress. Did you say? Did you have a female version of Savior?
Do you know what? I didn't. I didn't.
Too sacred?
It is to me.
I don't mean to be disrespectful.
It's okay. No, I'm not offended.
I mean, you went there.
I totally did. Some of the things I wrote even scandalized myself. Like, I don't know if I can write this. I didn't go there because, again, like, I didn't want it feel like I was disrespecting what is.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out the lack on the other side, but I didn't want to diminish the beauty that is there. I don't know. It's complicated. But yeah, there's goodness. There's goodness. Claudia and Carolyn Pearson said the Mormon heart is a good heart. And I appreciate you still doing Mormon Stories, because I think everybody's story is important. And we kind of, no matter if we're in or out, we're all connected by this. And it is a good heart. And I love everybody's, following their own path and supporting, helping each other on their way. It's good stuff.
All right. Well, Amy McPhie Allebest?
Allebest.
Allebest.
Not just good.
Allebest. Allebest.
Allebest.
I'm horrible with names. Thank you for joining us. This has been, I always have high expectations. I have a really high bar. This exceeded my expectations.
Thank you. For me too. Thank you.
So delightful. Say hi to Eric for me. Eric, let's hang out sometime. Check out chess.com.
Yeah. I'll pay you after for the plug, the advertising.
No, he doesn't need my plug. He's got like 20 billion members. But thank you. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Please join us at mormonstories.org. You can ask Amy questions, provide your constructive feedback, and we just appreciate your support. Obviously, I'm able to do this. The Open Stories Foundation is able to do this because of your donations. So if you want to see this kind of stuff continue, please consider being a monthly subscriber, donor. You can do that at mormonstories.org or at any of the podcasts we support: A Thoughtful Faith, Mormon Matters, Mormon Transitions, Gay Mormon Stories. Please provide us with your support if you're comfortable, and let's just do it. So thank you. And Amy, again, all the best. Thank you so much for coming, and good luck.
Thank you.
And we'll follow your budding writing career.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been awesome.
All right. Take care.